Next, by order of appearance, Congressman Mulvaney.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Gentlemen, thank you for your time today. Talk about an issue that I think is relevant in sort of a different way. This is Small Business Week in Washington, D.C. Mr. Heason, I especially appreciated your thoughts on the SBIR program, something we've been working on, and I wish we could get some permanent resolution to. I had always assumed before I came up here that this was an industry that was driven by some of the names that I heard earlier, the Genentechs, the Medtronics, the Eli Lillys. I'm getting the impression that is not necessarily the case, and I'm wondering, Mr. Heason, if you could at least maybe help educate me a little bit, or perhaps all of you, on the role that small business plays in this particular industry.
Well, what happens very often today is that your larger pharmaceuticals, your larger medical device companies are not doing R&D in-house. The way they today grow is by buying smaller venture-backed companies. It is part of the DNA of many of these large corporations to basically look at what is happening at these smaller companies and cherry pick and say, you know, we think that this company has potential and we will bring it in-house. So the small businesses play an absolutely essential role today as more and more large corporations forego doing in-house R&D and go, frankly, shop around and look at acquisitions of venture-backed companies and or licensing agreements, which is becoming more and more prevalent as well. So without these smaller companies, your larger companies are not going to be successful over the long term.
Let me press you on that, but I don't mean to cut you off, but you mentioned before something that caught my attention, which is that an R&D tax credit really doesn't have immediate value to a small company that doesn't have any tax obligation.
You don't have a tax obligation, you don't have a, yeah.
So if the small companies are doing all of the R&D, then how is a tax credit for R&D helping spur research and development?
That's a good question. I think that the smaller companies that try to go public, and there are certainly those who say will forego an acquisition because they really want to become a public company, which is a very important public policy goal. Those companies eventually are going to get, if they continue to grow and go public, they are eventually going to get to the point where they are tax-paying entities and are going to be able to take advantage of that R&D tax credit. But that is a long time after the venture capitalist has gotten out of line.
Dr. Sands?
Yes.
Y'all are what, 7 years into it without, is that what you said before?
15.
15. Good.
Yeah.
Great.
Which is typical.
7 drugs in development.
There it is, all right.
But I do think that the tax credit benefiting large companies is also important for small companies. You mentioned Genentech. We did a deal with Genentech. If they have more R&D dollars, they do deals with small companies. They don't just acquire them. We studied 500 genes with Genentech. We knocked out and studied the functions of 500 novel genes. It was a core part of their research program and ours. In total, we've studied 5,000 genes, and this was all a product of the Human Genome Project, which was started, of course, and led by the United States. But now all that information is out there in the rest of the world, and they're using it. But I do believe benefiting large companies is important, too, and will be important indirectly to us, because we seek deals with the large companies.
So, yes, sir.
We had also built in Texas at the time we had an R&D tax credit, because the companies, it takes such a long time, we had built in a very healthy carry forward. It was a 25-year carry forward, so that the event when they were profitable, there was an opportunity to begin to use those credits.
Gotcha. Let me ask you a different question, because we've heard some discussions today here about the issues about repatriation and so forth, and I guess I'm trying to get a fairly simple question here because I've only got 50 seconds left, which is, what's preferable? I mean, in the overall scheme of things, what would you gentlemen rather see? A world where you have to come here every couple of years and ask for an R&D tax credit extension, or a simplified tax system where the corporate tax rate is 25%, we have a territorial income tax system across the board?
Simplification and, more important, stability is most important, I think, to long-range planning of an entrepreneur.
Does anybody disagree with that? Dr. Tang?
I only disagree to the extent that the rest of the world has a different motive and a different method.
If simplify doesn't make us globally competitive, then we can't simplify for the sake of simplifying. And to an earlier point, I think the R&D tax credit is important, but it needs to catch up with the model of how R&D is being done in the life science industry. It needs to recognize that more R&D is being done off balance sheet from the large corporations, and that needs to be accounted for and encouraged, because the smaller companies unequivocally are the ones that are generating the jobs today. The larger companies are all consolidating and cutting jobs. So we've got to catch up with the model that actually exists in the world today.
Thank you, gentlemen. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thanks very much. Senator Lee.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.